Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today I will be talking about Season 3, Episode 17, The Motive, starring Skip Homeier as Tommy and William Redfield as Richard. And this is a perfectly entertaining episode, in my opinion. It is one of those episodes, however, where you can't question certain plot elements too much. You kind of got to just go with it. And also, I do feel like the first half of this episode takes a little while to get going, but once the episode gets going, it's interesting enough and different enough to feel unique, and it has a pretty solid twist ending, which I actually didn't see coming, so that's always a good thing as well. So this episode starts with three friends drinking. Their names are Tommy, Richard, and Sandra, and eventually they get around to talking about this chart that Tommy keeps. He keeps track of all the murders that take place and whether they have motives or not, which will be important to the plot. So eventually Sandra leaves as she seems like she's getting kind of uninterested in this conversation, even though she kind of acts like that's not the reason. I think maybe she's just being polite. So at this point, Tommy and Richard are left to talk more about this. They talk about the motives. And Tommy insists that if a murder has no motive, it's a lot harder to catch the person because basically the authorities have nothing to go on. But Richard kind of disputes this and at a point at this time, which will also be important later on in the episode. Then they start arguing about this woman that Tommy used to be hooked up with. Her name is Marion. It turns out she left him, but it also turns out this woman was involved with both Tommy and Richard. And you can tell that Richard doesn't seem to be too happy about this whole thing, which will also be important later on in the episode. So they chat more about murder. And at this point, Richard basically dares Tommy to commit a murder, that has no motive, although both men have been drinking, so we're not sure how serious they are about this. So at this point, they're following some people around, and Tommy decides he's going to pick a random name from the phone book to commit this murder, and they wind up landing on this guy's name, Jerome Stanton. So Tommy and Richard keep talking the next day about killing this guy, Jerome. And you can tell that at this point, Tommy's really serious about this for some reason. I'm not really sure why. But Richard basically plays it off like I was stoned last night. And he doesn't really seem to think that this is too good of an idea in all reality. We might find out something different later. So at this point, the setup of the episode takes quite a while to get going, but at this point, I feel like the episode really picks up as Tommy goes to Chicago and he calls the house where this Jerome lives to find out when he'll be home. And I have to say, the lady, I think she's a maid who works for Jerome, gives out a lot of information pretty willingly. She's pretty trusting. I'm just saying. So eventually, Tommy goes to this guy Stanton house and he's posing as some kind of man who's taking a scientific research poll and he wants to ask Stanton all these questions. And Stanton is also very, very trusting, but like I said, you have to kind of just go with it. So these questions he asked, some of them were normal, a couple of them were kind of strange. I really didn't buy Tommy as a research man at all, but I guess Stanton bought it. So at one point he gets Stanton to kneel down with a tape measure, and eventually this gives him the opportunity to hit him with a hammer and kill him. So Tommy goes back home, seeming pretty pleased with himself. He adds his murder to the chart along with all the others, which I thought was creepy and a nice touch for what's to come next. So he's sitting in some kind of restaurant or place, and he's reading the paper, and Richard comes in, and he's reading about the crime that was committed, the murder, and he basically tells Richard what happened. And it turns out that Tommy's not too happy when he finds out the police do have a suspect, which is him, because it turns out that Stanton's wife was Marion, the same Marion that was his ex and also Richard's ex. And it turns out that Richard set this whole thing up from the beginning, that Stanton was not a random person, that Richard knew Tommy would commit this crime and he could get revenge on both Tommy and Stanton. So like I said, kind of out there, but if you buy into it, it's a pretty solid twist, and I actually didn't see it coming. I thought the episode did a nice job of hiding Richard's true motivations, and things don't end too well for Tommy, as the two men kind of fight for a minute before the police come in and take him away. So overall, I do feel The Motive is a solid episode, and I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. And this is an episode that I recommend watching for fans of the show at least once. I thought it was solid enough. So 3 out of 5 for The Motive, and as always, thank you very much for watching.